A congressional hearing held yesterday showed some of the unspoken realities of transgender policies being aimed at kids. It raised issues on possible violations of due process. It exposed also some of the realities or harsher realities of what gender affirming care actually means. And here to speak with us about this is Gerald Posner, attorney, award-winning investigative journalist, and author of Pharma, Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America. Hey, Gerald Posner, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Great to be with you. Glad. Thanks for having me on, Josh.
Thank you. So, first of all, what does gender affirming care actually entail? Like, what is it?
Oh, I mean, gender affirming care, just the very name of it, the left is very clever about some things. They give good names to the things they're for or against. So bail reform sounds like they're reforming the bail laws, right? As opposed to just letting criminals out onto the street. When DeSantis in the state that I live in Florida tries to stop the sexualization of children and into schools, they call it "Don't Say Gay," knowing that that'll get everybody bothered who doesn't even look at the law. And so when it comes to gender affirming care, it is for children and adolescents, also for adults, but the one that has us all so angry is for children and adolescents who are on social media listening to TikTok or whatever else, and one week they think they're Superman, and one week they think they're Supergirl, and the next week they think they're another gender because they've just seen a TikTok video that says you can change your gender whenever you want. They go to a psychologist, a counselor, somebody at a school who says, that's right, what pronoun would you like to be called? And then they start what they call social transitioning. They change the pronouns, they let them dress in the other gender, and that leads pretty quickly to medical transitions, which includes drugs to stop the natural development of puberty, then hormones to sort of bring the other gender out that the child thinks they are at, and finally, if they get far enough along the line, a series of brutal surgeries that literally have permanent consequences from which they often end up in depression or suicidal ideation.
Jeez. Well, on the drugs, I read some of your work on it. I mean, you do some incredible stuff, but I understand some of these drugs aren't even approved to treat gender dysphoria. I mean, can you explain why that's significant? Like, why does it matter they're not approved to actually treat this?
So everybody who has heard about gender dysphoria or hormone blockers that block it or hormones to treat children should know one thing, big flashing yellow warning signs, not approved by the FDA for any of those purposes. We are doing an enormous scientific clinical study on children, and it's taking place in real time in the society, and 5 or 10 years down the road, everyone's going to look back and say, oh my God, how did we ever allow this to happen in the first place? There'll be class action lawsuits. People are going to be enraged because there is no clinical testing. There's no scientific testing that has been done on this. The FDA, this isn't illegal, believe it or not, sounds like it should be, but the FDA allows doctors to write a prescription for whatever reason they want to with a drug that's approved for a purpose. So, a lot of people listening to this show will understand that what they call off-label use leads sometimes to hit drugs. That's what happened with Viagra. They found out it had a side effect. That's what happened with Rogaine, which grew hair, and that's what happened with Botox, which lessened the look of wrinkles. All of those were off-label uses. But here, we're talking about children, and the off-label use is to stop the natural production of puberty or to put them on hormones of the opposite sex. Talking about children that are supposedly capable now of making a decision for what they want with permanent consequences. This is ludicrous, and I think this is one of the most dangerous things the FDA has ever allowed.
Well, and it raises some questions of if they're pushing it so hard, why has the FDA not approved it? Like, what have, and they're not telling us about why they're not approving it? Like, what's the concern with them?
No drug company has yet had to submit data to the FDA to show that this works, meaning gender affirming care and the idea of changing a child's gender before they're 18 years of age. So there are no studies on it because no drug company has to go forward and do it. And what we're talking about are, when I say puberty blockers, by the way, just so you know, these are 5 synthetic drugs. The most popular is put out by a drug company called AbbVie. It's a big pharmaceutical, $45, $50 billion a year in revenue. Lupron is one of their drugs. Any man who's ever had prostate cancer has probably been on Lupron. They give it to men who have prostate cancer because it slows up the cancer. It's also used off-label as a chemical castration for repeat sex offenders. And we're giving it to children to stop puberty. There's 10,000 incident reports at the FDA about young girls who were given this drug back in the 90s to, believe it or not, to make them grow taller on an idea that that might work. And they have just a litany of side effects, from brittle bones, bones that break too easily, suicide at points thinking about it, fibromyalgia, chronic pain. And yet here with children and gender, because you can't say anything bad about gender-affirming care, the FDA has stayed off, the American Medical Association has stayed off, the American Pediatrics Association, much to their shame, has adopted one of the most progressive standards on gender-affirming care, and so has the Endocrine Society. American medical societies have abandoned the safety and the health of children on this critical issue. We have to get that reversed to those medical associations.
Well, tell me more about this, because, one of the big narratives we hear about the puberty blockers, and, I know some kids are being told they can take them to delay puberty until they're ready. It's one of the things they're telling some kids. And I can imagine, you're 12 years old or 13 years old and it's coming on and it sounds scary, and so you want to avoid it, and they're telling you, hey, here's something to put it on pause for a bit. Can you really just put it on pause and not have permanent damage? Because what you're saying is that it's used for chemical castration for, like, sex offenders, and it causes, aside from even sexual impact, even like bone mass problems. What are the actual effects of these things?
These are powerful drugs. And do we know all of the effects? No, because we haven't had the studies done, but we do know some of the effects. And the big lie here, the lie that is being perpetrated under Joe Biden's administration by the National Institutes of Health and federal agencies with taxpayer money, if you look at their sites, it says puberty blockers are totally reversible. That's just not true. The evidence is out there. The FDA has their own incident reports. We know that from children who have taken puberty blockers. You take a child who's about to develop puberty at 12, 13 years of age, you block it chemically so it's delayed for 5 months, 6 months, 7 months. And then 90 to 95% of those children who have puberty blockers go on to the next step, which we call cross-sex hormones, which is testosterone for girls or estrogen for boys. So you can start to look a little bit more, you get a deeper vocal cord, you sound a little bit deeper if you're a girl, you develop more of an Adam's apple, a little bit of hair you develop on your face, and the boys start to look a little bit more feminine, they not quite as masculine in their muscular shape. Those have permanent consequences without any doubt. So the idea that we're stopping puberty for a 12 or 13-year-old, and then they're going to have a normal development afterwards if they decide to go ahead with more medical treatment or less on gender, is just a fallacy. And we're starting to realize that, I think, in a new look at this in terms of investigative work, but it hasn't yet captured the American public. Many parents are afraid to stand up. They feel bullied when their child says, believe it or not, I identify as another gender or a different sex. The parents who say no to that are immediately called transphobic. They're sort of ostracized in many progressive communities. And in some instances, states like Oregon, progressive states, know that parents are potentially a problem. They could say no, so they get rid of them entirely. In Oregon now, they have a new law just passed this year. From 15 and on, without any parental consent, you can go ahead and have puberty blockers if a clinician or a school counselor agrees that that's the right path for you. You can go ahead and have both of your breasts taken off if you're a girl, a double mastectomy without parental consent. And that same state, I love Oregon, requires you to have a written doctor's permission and parental consent, and you have to be 18 years of age before you can use a tanning bed. So Oregon is going to protect you from getting cancer, so you can't use a tanning bed. But you can go ahead and take your breast off, or you can start puberty blockers at 15 without parental consent. To me, that's just madness.